if it's any brighter than Marty's clothes.
But she's not doing much.
It might be, is Diamond Head on the backside?
Yeah, I think it's the bottom,
Yeah.
right
So it's only chops up in little pieces.
Okay.
Well, at any rate, my call sign is K0GVS. My original call sign was KN0GVS. Oh, thank you. And,
You have a pocket up here or something?
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, clip it to your collar there.
There you go.
There.
Good.
Boy, that's loud.
Good, good.
It's good. You know how I feel.
Any rate, I've had all the different classes of amateur radio licenses since 1955, roughly. I've had the novice, tech, conditional, except for general, but general and conditional are basically one and the same. In 1975, I got forced into upgrading. My friend, the assistant field engineer, pulled a sneaky on me. He decided that since I was going to come late, so that I wouldn't have to upgrade at the convention, he went to him about 10 minutes before I got there and said, I'm going to stay an extra half hour so that everybody coming in by 5 o'clock can still take the tests and upgrade. Well, Frank and I had a few words after that. But that's all right. We were good friends, and it didn't matter. I only took 10 minutes to do the advanced class test anyhow. The advanced class test and the extra class code test, which I didn't intend. Any rate, and about 10 years ago, I got coerced into taking the extra class test, which again took me about another 10 minutes of my time at the field day. And I figured, okay, now they can't ask me to upgrade anymore.
We've done it.
When I first started in electronics about 60 years ago, that was just about the end of the time when they would give you a chunk of quartz, 2 pieces of blue stovepipe metal, and you had to fiddle around and find the diode junction for your crystal radio. Then after that, they started putting in 1N34As. It was a whole lot easier. I remember that. And the novice test, and then my...
Keycap with the label.
And then my tech, and then my conditional. And the guy that gave me my conditional test pulled a sneaky on me. He was one of these guys that could carry on a conversation and copy code at the same time. And he did, when he sent me my 2 minutes worth of stuff, it was better than 26 words a minute. And I copied it all. I had one word that I wasn't sure if it was an S or an H in it, because it came by so quick. But when I looked at the words afterwards, I figured out what it was. So he said, well, you passed. Here's your written test. It was fun, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting it over and done with and out of the way, because then I could operate on 75 meter AM.
Right.
Now, when I first started, the Harvey Wells bandmaster was the king of band switching. Now, a lot of you people don't even know what the heck a Harvey Wells bandmaster is. Well, it was a turret switch in the middle, and then a bunch of coils around the outside, and then links coming off of them. And so that was the way you did band switching. At the same time as I was getting started, the Pi-Net tuner started just started coming out. Now, Pinette was something different. It would tune, if you had a roller inductor like this, you could tune thousands of different ratios, but they were all from about 8 plus to 8 minus, down around 10 ohms to as high as 1,000, 2,000 ohms. For well over 30 years, Pinette was king when it came to antenna matching. Now, just a few years back, solid state rigs started coming out. Now, a solid state rig has very little forgiveness. It says 50 ohms, not 60, not 70, not 30 or 40, but 50 ohms. And I know that some of you have noticed that your solid state rig won't put out the 100 watts it's supposed to on certain antennas on certain frequencies. And you haven't figured out why. Well, it's because the solid state is a strip line type tuner. The output is done with a chunk of foil and capacitors tapped onto it. Now, one of these things is not, this isn't really an antenna tuner, because it doesn't really tune the antenna. It matches the output of your transceiver to the antenna. So it's a matching device rather than a tuner. Now, this particular one whoa. Oh, okay, there it goes. In and out. This capacitor matches the input to the middle frequency, and this one matches the middle frequency to the output. Thank you. And you tap down in the coil to get the best possible match for the common frequency between the input and output. Now, most of these tuners are about 6 or 8 to 1 matching input to output from either side. Some of them go as high as 16 to 1, and this one will go down about 16 to 1 up and 16 to 1 down. So that's a long way. I have tuned my roof gutters on my home in Hawaii, which are 25 feet on the side, total of 150-foot loop, because I have a hexagon-shaped house. And I have matched the output of my 746 Pro from 830 kilocycles at about a watt output to that antenna. Now, you're saying, what the heck are you doing down at 830 kilocycles? Well, we have hurricanes up there. And after a hurricane, sometimes we don't have any communications, like the one 20 years back when the people would, I got a cell phone, I'm going to be able to get a hold of it. And they, geez, you can't get anything. No dial tone. Because the public service office took over the cell sites for the cell phones. And they are the only ones that had communications. The rest of the people didn't, except for the few hams on the island. And I remember one of my friends used to come home from work about 5 o'clock, and there would be 2 blocks worth of cars parked from his door down the block and around the corner, and he'd be up until 12, 1 o'clock in the morning sending health welfare messages back to the lower 48. And if you didn't see him, you didn't get out. Just as simple as that. Now, back to, quote, antenna tuners. When we match up the input to 50 ohms on your transceiver, and the output to whatever the impedance is on your antenna, you will find the ratio, and it works. Now, this particular one's got all kinds of outputs on it. One of them happens to be unbalanced output, single wire, and it's got ladder line output, and then it's got 3 coax connectors on the back. And it matches all kinds of stuff. Now, when you use something like this, you don't need a big one. This one is a 1500 watt tuner or matcher, and you can get by with a little 949E that's about that high, about that wide, and about that deep, and it handles up to 300 watts input, not output, but input. And it will match your transceiver to your tube type power amplifier. You say, well, why do you need one there? Well, it's real simple. Even though it says in your manual for your tube type power amplifier that it's supposed to be 50 ohms input and 50 ohms output, well, the 50 ohms output depends on what your capacity ratios and the induction ratio is, but the input is seldom 50 ohms. It can be anywhere from 15 or 20 to as high as 70 or 80 ohms. And if you don't match your 50 ohm output of your transceiver, your solid state transceiver, which most of us have these days, hardly anybody has a transceiver with a pi net on it anymore. Anybody here have one with a pi net?
KWM2?
Joe, you were right. But that's a tube. No, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's tube type. Yeah. I'm talking about solid state. I don't think there's a solid state transceiver out there that has a pi net on it. I haven't seen one. Which one?
Icon 756. You got that in the house.
Oh, yeah, it's got, well, that's, yeah, but it's got the automatic version. Now, the automatic version is not as good as it's made out to be. It'll get you down to 2-to-1 mismatch, but that cuts your output down about 20%. So if you're off very far, you don't have 100 watts coming out of it. You've got 80, sometimes 70. If you want 100 watts, you put a 949E in series with it to whatever you want to use the next stage, and then you'll get your 100 watts. But you don't get it unless you do that. So, trying to think. I think it's just as easy for me right now to ask if you have any questions dealing with, quote, antenna tuners. What? everybody knows everything about it. Good.
Now, this particular one you have up there, what does that cost?
Oh, this one,
No, the one you're just pointing out.
oh, the one I got,
Yeah,
three something, almost $400.
yeah, it's a significant amount outlay right there.
Yeah, but the 940, actually 949E, I think is about 100 or 120,
Okay, and that's adequate for most,
and that's adequate. It's
300.
most
300 watts input,
yeah,
150 watts output,
okay,
and it does everything you need. And besides, that particular one just happens to have a dummy load in it. It's got a pass-through switch in it.
right.
It's got all kinds of goodies in it, and it works pretty nice. I know I've had 3 or 4 of them
Right.
in the last 15, 20 years.
Mhm.
You can make little ones for 2 meters and 220.
Well, yeah, but those generally are way different than the 949. They're not made like that. Because they're a completely different application. They're set up for solid state equipment rather than tube type. And the 949E is made for tube types or anything.
Ben, tell us about the odd harmonics in that tuner.
I don't even get into that because it really doesn't matter with that style of tuner. It seems to me there's the odd or even that it kicks out.
Square waves have odd harmonics.
Okay. I couldn't remember one way or another. So that means at twice the frequency, at 4 times the frequency.
Odd.
Oh, I'm sorry,
3579.
3579. It puts out garbage. Now, if you aren't careful, you'll get a notice from one of the field stations. It said, "You were heard on," and you look in your log and you were on 20 meters and they had you on 10. Or,
That's a high pass filter.
right. Yeah.
So all the harmonics go right on through.
That's why pi is better, it's a low.
Yes,
Right.
it's a low pass filter.
Right. That's why it was king in its day, and that's also why it lasted over 30 years. Now, I don't remember how long the tank circuits were around, but they were around a long, long time. And I remember Harvey Wells Bandmasters literally forever. And all the other things that I've seen in the last 50 plus years are just so much passing over the water passing over the dam. In fact, I don't think that when the Pinet became king, I don't remember there being anything else. Do you remember anything else during that time span? I remember a friend of mine had a roller inductor and 2 big capacitors, and he had literally an unlimited tuning range for his output. But everybody and their brother, World Radio Labs with the Globe King 500 series. I'm sure some of you remember those. I knew Leo Meyerson personally. He was a nice guy, and he helped me out. I was the only junior in high school that had an open account at World Radio Labs. In my junior year, I decided I wanted a Collins 32V3, so he sent me one.
That's generous.
Yeah, well, I had to pay for it, but still, he sent it to me without paying for it first.
I have a question.
Yes.
If you're doing solid state antenna matching at 50 ohms using a microprocessor like most of us do now with automatic tuner,
Mhm.
I'm curious about the accuracy with that, as far as what you're saying. Sure, if you're measuring, putting out 100 watts and measuring reflected power with a carrier wave, yeah, that's gonna give you something pretty accurate. But what if you're using something like an old Dentron tuner and doing it by ear?
Well,
And what's the comparison with using an automatic tuner versus doing it old school?
this one here
Or
has
maybe
a
I'm out of league here.
dual, a dual forward reverse watt meter in it.
Well, you can measure that, yes. When I
Yeah.
have a tuner at home that doesn't, the one that I don't use, I have an old Dentron
I used to
super
have
tuner,
one.
sure, that doesn't
Yeah.
have forward reflected power. And I was trained to do that when I got my general, of course, doing it completely by ear. You can match it somewhat closely, but an automatic tuner with a, microprocessor control seems to be,
They're
would that
only
be more
good for-
accurate versus, of course, if you can measure forward
They're
and
only
reflected?
when you get down below 2 to 1, they're not that accurate.
Okay.
That's all they want to do is get it below 2 to 1.
So you can't tune 1.5 to 1 or finer.
I believe it doesn't
With an
even
auto-
kick in until
You mean the processor you're
Yeah.
talking about won't actually detect that?
it gets over 2 to 1.
So why haven't they made a finer tuner that can control?
Oh, they
it?
have.
You think they would?
They,
I mean, built
not-
into some of these
not
guys
built
have TS
into it.
2000s, for example, it has a built-in tuner. I don't. I have an external automatic tuner, but
They
with the
have,
integrated circuitry, you think they would?
they have tuners, excuse me, that externally will do better, but I don't think they can do it automatically. You got to push the button.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but using an automatic antenna tuner, like on the 2000, for example, the TS2000 will only match a 2 to 1 SWR.
If-
You can't
if
get
it's-
finer than that. You're saying without doing
It's got to be greater than 1.5 to 1, for
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
And definitely 2 to 1 is retuned.
So if you had a short high-end coax and everything else, the best your radio could do, even though you could match it close 1.2 to 1, you couldn't technically match closer to
Problem
that with
with
your
having
automatic tuner.
a long chunk of coax is the impedance
Your impedance goes up.
takes the characteristic of the cable.
Right.
So you're not even looking at the antenna. The cable is in the way.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Even if you have a high-end, highly shielded short coax, say 10 feet, to
No.
a mast.
The problem, the problem is your coax should be at least electrically a half wavelength.
Right, it has to be halfway length, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, if you had a better match with your setup than your antenna tuner could get you, are you better off using the integrated antenna tuner or just actually measured forward and reflected power?
Using one of these.
Okay, and doing it by ear is not gonna get you anywhere close, like if you had an old style Dentron super tuner.
I don't even know how you do it by ear.
Okay.
Peak,
That's
the
how I
noise.
started.
Oh, I
Peak
see what you're
noise,
talking
yeah.
about.
You try to find the best noise floor you can find, the highest amount of
Put a
noise.
cheap SWR meter in front of it, then you're
Well, that's
set.
what I did eventually.
Okay.
But I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
he's saying that doing it this way is so much more accurate, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious about why the microprocessors can't detect better than, as you were saying, a 2 to 1 or 1.5 to 1 SWR. It just seems
Well,
to be a
that's
little bit
just-
better match than
Just the way
Push
they
the
work.
button.
And you gotta push the
Exactly.
button.
Exactly, okay.
Now, I've got a,
I'm sorry to take up time, guys, I just wanted to clarify. for
yeah,
my
I've got
own
an
learning.
ICOM 746 Pro. Unfortunately, the doggone thing is not working. The, I don't know whether it's the op amp chip or what is blown on it, but it doesn't work.
Want to sell it?
No, not really.
Oh, okay.
I will get it fixed sooner or later. How much? How much?
I'll give you $20 for
No.
Ben?
Yeah.
Now, you talked about the tuner and how it transforms the impedance.
Right.
And that helps the output of your transceiver, maximum power transfer when it's matched.
Yep.
But the other part of it is, you haven't solved the SWR problem. You
No.
still have 50 ohm coax going up to a mismatched antenna.
But
There is still loss,
it
and there's still
depends.
reflected power.
Yeah, but there isn't as much because, let's say the impedance coming down that line is 150 ohms. Now you're matching 50 to 150.
Not if you're using 50 ohm coax, you still have a mismatch
Yeah,
for that
you're-
transition from 50 ohms to your antenna.
Yeah, but
You're disguising
depending
the
upon the length of the coax electrically.
Yeah.
Anytime it's electrical halfway, coax may as well not even be there.
Yeah, you're
Doesn't do
really-
anything.
But how many people go out and measure 33 foot of coax on a 40 meter?
Almost no, well, it wouldn't be 33 feet anyhow.
Well, that's a quarter, 66 feet.
It wouldn't be 66 either, it'd be 66 times the velocity factor.
Well,
Yeah, but I know what you're saying. Yes,
You say to use the tuners, so to speak.
yeah.
Tell us your procedure of how to utilize the tuner.
Well, what I do is
Looking at the little diagram you have up there, you got your 3 units to tune. What do you
this
tune
goes in the
first?
middle of the range, as does this, and then I tune the inductor until I get the maximum amount of noise on the transceiver, and that tells me that I'm now matched,
Oh, I see, okay.
fairly close.
Right.
And then I put out 2 watts, 5 watts, 10 watts, whatever, and tune it from there.
So you're tuning the inductor for maximum noise,
Yep.
static noise, and then you turn your transmitter on.
Yep.
And using 10 watts input, let's say 20 watts, I usually use 20.
Yep.
Then you tune your
Input and output capacity.
input, output, back and
And-
forth.
You also will change the inductance back and forth a little bit
Okay.
to see if there's any better inductance and capacitance combination.
Okay.
In this particular one, I tuned the coil, the inductor,
Mhm.
first, and then I tuned the 2 capacitors.
All right.
And it works. This one I used on my MFJ 1300, whatever that, 1300 watts out. And this was in the output of it. And I used 949E between the 746 Pro and the amplifier. And I did that to match up the impedance between the transceiver and the amplifier. Because it wasn't 50 ohm input either.
Do you ever use the dummy load that's included in here?
Once in a big while.
And that's not a resistive unit, is it? A 50
Yeah.
ohm resistor?
Yeah, it's a carbon
Power resistor,
resistor.
not Wi-Fi.
No, that would have inductance.
And what is it, 300 watt, I believe, these units, dummy load.
Yeah,
Better be 15.
well, 1500 is the maximum you can run through this.
Input.
Yeah, the 300 watts is what you can run on it without any problem. I gotta take a short break. Okay, anybody else have any questions? Can't guarantee I can give you all the answers, but I come pretty close most of the time.
What
Well,
about
there's a
the
little-
little signs here?
Oh,
Tell us
What do you
about
look like
those.
with the cover on?
I'm not gonna take the cover off.
Then there was an article in QST about mentioned networks. I don't know if you saw it this month.
I haven't,
You don't get it?
I haven't gotten the QSD yet.
Well, anyway, they're talking about being careful that you didn't drive too much after you got things all loaded up, because your
Right.
components may not take what you're feeding and it just vaporizes components, so you have to be careful.
My little sign says, "I love hugs,
And ladybugs, you see the little ladybugs.
There you go.
Now, most people like hugs, especially the gals.
Yeah, there you go.
And I like hugs, always have. And ladybugs, well, they just keep the insects down. And then down here below it says, have you had joy in your life? Have you brought joy to others? And that was a Buddhist saying. And I sat down one day and figured out that I had brought joy to probably 50 people that I knew of for sure. And there was probably that many or more that had brought joy to me. So it's just one of those things. And it's always something nice to get a hug. I enjoy it. Most of the gals I know enjoy it. Anybody not enjoy it?
I don't think so.
Good.
Well, Ben, thanks
He's
a lot.
helping you convince him.
Okay. Any last bit of questions? Okay.
Take some stuff out of the car.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, come on.